Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. I'm Diane Okonski, President of the Icelandic National League of the United States, and I'm very happy you're able to join us today. The INLUS is committed to providing programs, classes, and other offerings that create a connection point for Icelanders, those of Icelandic descent, and for those interested in Iceland. More information can be found on the INLUS on our social media, our blogs and newsletters, and on our website, inlus.org. If you are already a member of the INLUS, I thank you very much. If you are not a member, I would encourage you to join. The membership funds go to fund scholarships, grants, local projects, Icelandic classes, and other offerings. But before we get started today, I just have a couple of reminders. The first is that the program is being recorded and will be available on the INLUS website in a couple of days. Second, as an attendee to the program, you are on mute. However, we welcome your questions, and we will answer as many as possible at the end of the program today. To ask a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you are on a tablet or a phone, that button may be either up in the upper right-hand corner, or you may have to swipe to find it, but don't let that stop you. We want to hear your questions. Today we have with us William R. Short and Reynir A. Óskarson. William was awarded a Doctor of Science degree from MIT and spent many years in research in the fields related to acoustics and audio, receiving dozens of patents and sharing the IPO Inventor of the Year Award in 1987. However, after reading some sagas and attending an Icelandic class at the University of Iceland, Dr. Short pivoted to full-time study of Viking-related topics focusing on combat. He is the manager of the New England-based organization Hurstwick and leads their research. He was also a research fellow at Higgins Armory Museum. William is the author of Viking Weapons and Combat Techniques from Westholm in 2009 and Icelanders in the Viking Age, published by McFarland in 2010. Reynir A. Óskarson grew up in Iceland, a land steeped in Viking history, where the sagas are a required reading in school. Starting at an early age, Reynir received extensive martial arts training and in many forms of combat. He holds instructor's degrees in a number of combative arts and has been teaching, giving seminars, and competing both domestically and abroad. Reynir's research in Glima, the Viking Age empty hand combat that evolved into Iceland's national sport, has received accolades from current and past chairmen and champions at Glímusambands Íslands, the Wrestling Association of Iceland. Together, they have written the book Men of Terror, a comprehensive analysis of Viking combat, published by Westholm in 2021, which forms the basis of today's presentation. So welcome to both of you, and I will turn it over to you, William. I believe you're going to start us out.
All right. Thank you very much, Diane. Reynir and I are both honored to be here, and we thank our audience for joining us today. I'm going to share my screen because we have a lot of pictures that we'd like to share with you. And there we are. So what we plan to do today is to give you some insight into this grand concept we call Viking combat. And that will lead to insight into the Viking people and their society. And we also plan to talk about the research we did for our new book and how we did it. We'll have the questions and discussion at the end. But before we start, I ask that you leave your preconceived notions about Vikings and Viking combat at the door. Our research has led to some new discoveries, even though they may seem like common sense, as I'll discuss in a moment. Now, we are, there we go. We are Hurstwick. We are a team that scientifically researches the combative methods of the Vikings. And our book, Men of Terror, takes its title from this memorial stone, raised in Denmark about 1,000 years ago. And it was raised in a memory of a man named Fradi. The text is hard to interpret, but it seems to say that he was the first among Vikings and that he was a terror of men. So what did Frodi do as a Viking to be called a man of terror? Why was he so admired that a memorial stone was raised in his memory? And one more comment, the use of the word Vikings is controversial, but I will use it in this presentation, even though there's a way longer and much less cool academic word for these people. They would have used the word Vikinger to describe themselves, but only in a very limited and specific way that we'll talk about later in the presentation. And it's the basis of a 1-hour lecture all on its own. Now, I'm going to use the word pretty generically to mean any of the people of Northern Europe, and Scandinavia is their homeland, in the early medieval period, about 1,000 years ago. Now, our initial goal was to uncover the ways that Vikings did combat. But as we researched it, we actually put a human face on this brutal society we call Vikings, people like Frodi on the memorial stone. And there is violence in all the sources, as you will see in this presentation. It is in their pictures, it's in their stories, their myths, their poetry, even in their law codes, violence is permitted. So as an example, proof of ability to wield weapons is required to interact with the legal system. To be a witness in certain kinds of legal cases, the law states that a man must be able to deal out death. And you can even see evidence of this violence sometimes in their architecture of their homes. You can see why a house was placed on a certain site and why the house had certain features, and they're all based on combat. And this threat of violence created a twisted society. One needed to be prepared all the time. Havamal, a poem of advice from the Viking age, says, one of the verses says that you should never be more than 1 footstep away from your weapon because you don't know when you're going to need it. And another verse says that when you enter a room, look behind the door to make sure there's no enemy hiding behind there. But yet, at the same time, it created a society that protected those in need, as we'll talk about later in the presentation. Our research suggests that you cannot understand Vikings unless you understand Viking combat. That's what we try to do in the book, and that's what we're going to try to do today. Provide an understanding of Viking combat and thus Viking society. Now, some of what we're going to talk about will seem like common sense, but it wasn't. It will only be common sense to you in this very moment because we spent years of toil making sense of it all. It took us years to figure out, but in mere moments, you will have known it all along. Now, it's hard to fit us into a category. We're not modern Vikings. In fact, we're not Viking at all. We're not reenactors. These people bring happiness and they bring the Viking age to life differently than we can. Reynir's sister calls us Viking perverts due to our fascination with this period. And in some bizarre way, we are scientists. We use the scientific method to understand Vikings and their combat. And we think this is not common, using science in this way to study history. And there's many more of us that make up the Herstwick team, and you'll see some of them in the pictures today. Now, integrity and truth are our only goals. We try to test everything at Herstwick, and that in many ways is what separates us from others in the field of Viking exploration. When we start a project, we don't have an opinion on what works or not, or what is true or not. The only difference between those who have seen the Vikings TV show once and the high academic is the academic part. They both have an opinion on how things should be. The difference is that one of them has an academic opinion. We, on the other hand, test it. And here's an important point. Many of those who are studying Vikings, and especially Viking combat, are trying to figure out the most efficient way to use Viking weapons. They conclude that that is how Vikings fought. But what we seek is something quite different. What we seek is how Vikings use their weapons. As an example of that distinction, if we went back in a time machine and talked to Attila the Hun and asked him what he wanted to improve his army's war powers, he wouldn't say machine guns or tanks or predator drones. He would say something like faster horses or more penetrating arrows. And so we must aggressively keep modern mindset out of our research. And I think Reynir is going to talk about some aspects of that.
Yep, I'll mention a few. I love doing Zoom meetings. I'm assuming all the audience is applauding and it all. That's just how I go with it. So the modern mindset has many subcategories, and we're just going to deal with 3 of them really quickly, so you understand the traps and pitfalls possible. So one is what William mentioned before, that is modern efficiency. That is, how can we use Viking tools, Viking weapons most effectively, most efficiently with our modern constraints. But that might not be how they use the weapons at all. So that's one trap. The other one is categorization. In modern society, we like to put everything in neat boxes, and the Viking Age people didn't seem to have the same boxes. For example, the concept of troll, tröll. It can refer to the giantess, the monster. It can refer to a ghost, a draugur. It can refer to a strong man. It can also refer to a man with magical abilities. So that's one word with many concepts. It could also be the opposite. Many words for one concept. And we'll go with that, go into that a little bit later with Holmganga and Envy. So the third one is zeitgeist, the spirit of the times, what we cherish today, what we hold this truth today, what is modern, hip, cool today might not have existed in the Viking Age, or might have been horrendous in the Viking Age. And what the Viking Age people thought was just a normal behavior might have been horrendous today. So it's really, we need to really be cautious about painting the past with the colors of the present. Back to you, William, I think.
Okay, so our goal as we do our research is truth and integrity, not something to enforce our opinions. We don't do flat earth research where we design an experiment to prove our preconceived ideas. And an example of that is the move of cutting off a spearhead with a sword. It's mentioned many, many times in the literary sources as something easy to do and used by a man who's standing in his doorway defending his house. And we tried it seems like 1,000 times, and we could never make it work. We tried different species of wood. We tried different ways of holding it. We even tried bracing the spear shaft in a door and running at it, and we could never get it to cut. And we researched it. We talked to wood experts, and they explained it probably was not possible. And that's because the wooden spear shaft has many, many parallel fibers running through it like this. And when you cut it with the sword might cut through the first few layers, but then the momentum of the sword is transferred to the spear shaft, and the two move as a unit, and there's no more cutting. So we thought we had proven it wrong in theory and practice. This must be an exaggeration in the literary sources. And then something really strange happened. In one of our simulated combat sessions, we accidentally and unintentionally cut off the head of a spear shaft. So I'm on the left, I'm using a two-handed axe, and my opponent is Tyler from our Herstwick group on Cape Cod using a spear. And you can see I've just cut off the head of his spear and it's falling to the ground. And all three of us are looking at it incredulously, wondering what just happened. And it suggested that there might be something to this idea. So we went back to the lab and studied it more carefully. We used other analytical tools. We used high-speed videos. And we realized there was some really complex physics going on between the interaction of the wood fibers in the spear shaft and the steel of the spear head. And when we understood it, then it became very easy to cut. And we could cut through a spear shaft pretty much every time we tried it. And that's an example of an aspect of our research. We're really aggressive at keeping ego out of our research. We tested something a million ways, like cutting the spear shaft. We've proven it wrong in theory and practice. We claimed we had some truth. But when we realized we were wrong, without hesitation, we dropped it and started researching for how we had failed. So now that we've talked about our research, I'd like to talk about the sources we use. What sources are available for our research? And the answer is we have to use many sources because no one source has all the answers. We need all the parts to understand how it works. One part alone doesn't explain it. And to illustrate that, I'd like to use this example. Suppose we found the wreckage of an alien spacecraft in the desert, and we want to understand it and learn how to operate so we can recreate it. And we have no idea, so we need to use reverse engineering. And we can't do that by looking at just one piece. We can't take the fragments of the hyperdrive engine back to the lab. We need all the pieces if we're going to reverse engineer the entire craft. And more than that, we want information from other sources as well to put together the puzzle pieces. So we're going to talk to people who have been abducted by aliens, and we're going to look at grainy photographs of UFOs in flight. And what we're going to do is use layered sources. Just one single source is not enough, but we're going to layer one source on top of another source on top of another source. And as we do that, everything must point in the same direction. Something that points in a different direction has to be understood and considered. So maybe our thinking is wrong. So we put on a source that points in the wrong direction. And it's because we're starting out with a false hypothesis. Our foundation is faulty and the whole house of cards collapse. Or maybe we put on something that points in the wrong direction. And it's because that object has been misinterpreted. And Reynir will give you an example of that in a moment. Or perhaps we have hundreds of sources that point one direction and one or two or three that point in another, and they are simply outliers. We don't seek the outliers. We seek the common thread that runs through all these sources. We're seeking the common thread to create a holistic picture of Viking combat. So here's a brief look at the sources we use. We use pictorial sources such as picture stones from Viking lands and tapestries and other textile arts and manuscript illuminations. And we use contemporary runestones, such as the runestone that told us about Fradi. We use literary sources, and many of these were written in Iceland in the Old Icelandic language. So we have the sagas of Icelanders, legendary sagas, other sagas, but we also have histories, poetry, genealogies, law books, and we have a few other early medieval sources from other Scandinavian lands, such as Saxo Grammaticus from Denmark. And we have sources from the foreign lands that were touched by Vikings. And they offer a unique perspective, a point of view of people unfamiliar with Vikings and often adversarial to Vikings. And many of these works were written by people who abhorred the Vikings because of the violence, but who may have admired their bravery and combat skills. So we have material from the Anglo-Saxons in what is now England, and from the Franks in what is now France, and from the Moors in what is now Spain and Portugal. We use etymology. The origin of a word helps us understand the use of the object the word describes. And a good example of that is spear in the old language, spiot, which is cognate with the English word for spit, the iron rod that you push through a piece of meat to cook it over the fire. And that tells us what the spear was used for. It's not meant for poking or jabbing. It's meant for pushing all the way through your opponent. And we use echoes of the past. Memories of the Nordic people alive today who practice the old ways as part of their normal everyday life. So as an example, people who built and lived in this turf house in the picture are still alive today, and they can tell us about life in turf houses that resemble Viking age turf houses. We use pre-Viking age material. There's even less information available than for Viking times, but it allows us to see the evolution and progression. We use basic kinesiology, the mechanics of body movement. It tells us how the body moves, and it's universal. We use experimental archaeology, where we experiment with modern replicas meant to mirror historical artifacts. And here we often depend on the works of others. For example, groups who build and sail replica Viking ships. We use their replicas to understand naval combat. And we use bioarchaeology, which is the study of human skeletal remains. And they teach us about health and physical capabilities and battle wounds and medical practices, and also about societal norms. What these two skulls teach us about 10th century Icelandic society could be the basis of a 1-hour lecture just on its own. We use experimental bioarchaeology, where we, for example, cut with sharp replica weapons to animal carcasses as a stand-in for a human. Do the weapons recreate the injuries described in the literary sources? Do the weapons leave marks on the bones like we see in the skeletal remains? Does the armor protect as it expected? And then finally, archaeology is probably our most important source. It's the trump card that can accelerate our thinking or stop it dead in its tracks. And it's one of the few contemporary sources we have for the Viking people. Now, there's benefits and limitations to every single one of these sources, and that includes archaeology. For example, the artifacts that are found need to be interpreted, and there can be errors in interpretation. And Reynir will talk about one that he studied.
Yep. So this is a museum piece thought to be from the 11th century, found in Norway in the Lillehammer Museum. And I love it as much as I hate it. It has been mentioned in reference books and articles for a long, long time, let's say 100 years. So we use the layer sources. I had layered all the sources together to paint a really clear picture of Viking age empty-handed combat. And on that house of card, I put this wretched artifact, and it all crumbled. So what could I do? This is an artifact, contemporary artifact. So I had to scratch my head for about a year until I had to the museum and tell them this is impossible. It can't be right. It can't be from the 11th century. And lo and behold, Now it is thought to be much younger, from the 19th or really early 20th century. And I know you are all applauding now, even though I can't see or hear you, because we just changed history. But now that I've told you this, you can see it clearly. You can see the nails are really modern, and the style of clothing the same. So it just took about 100 years plus 1 year for me to figure it out. But when you look at it, of course it isn't from the 11th century. Am I missing something, William?
No, I think that's it. As we study these things, we try to use, we use layered sources to seek the common thread that runs throughout all the sources rather than the outliers. And also we even go deeper. We layer sources from the same category. So for instance, in literary sources, we layer sagas on top of runestones, on top of Eddas, on top of Saxo Grammaticus in order to solve the puzzle. And by using this approach, we've created a holistic picture of Viking combat in our book. Reynir? You're muted, Reynir.
Better if you do hear me.
Yes.
Using this approach, we found out that there are 3 pillars of understanding Viking combat. If you understand these 3 pillars, you understand the big picture of Viking combat. And if you understand the big picture of Viking combat, you understand Vikings much better. These are mindset, empty-hand combat, and general weapons and preparedness. And I'll start off with mindset. And every one of these topics could be an hour lecture. So bear with me, even though I'm making it hastily. So the first is they often overlook the concept of mindset. Thoughts govern action, and what we think is what we will do. What we will do or won't do in battle, the same. It's based on mindset. And I always use the analogy of feudal Japan. Here we have 2 warrior classes, the samurai and ninja, born in the same country, ate the same food, spoke the same language, probably have the same DNA, even though I have no idea what DNA is. So if we took away their external markers, their attire, and their weapons, and gave them something they had never seen before, like a 2-piece suit and a Tommy gun, and I would tell them both, high noon tomorrow, you will fight to the death. The day after, the samurai would be standing proud, stating his name and the name of his clan, issuing his challenge, while the ninja would sneak up behind him and shoot him in the back of the head. So this is what we talk about when we talk about mindset and how it affects combat. So what was the mindset of Vikings? There are 3 main key subjects to it. Number 1 is drengur, and here we see a runestone raised in the memory of Smiður, and he is thought to be a drengur. And drengur has always been translated as a valiant man or an honorable man, but we had to go deep, really do deep analysis of what on earth does it mean, not what did somebody interpret it to mean in the 1950s. And it means a man or woman who you can trust. It is infused with honor, but it is a man or woman you can trust. And that is the highest trait in a violent society. So a man you would trust would go with you to battle. He would not flee. He would fight to the very bitter end. A man who you could trust, he would tell you about an ambush, or he would join you in an ambush against someone else. So being a drengur was the highest ideal. And we usually see the concept of drengur being used in connection with battle. Somebody fought drengilega and died, or he became a drengur because he fought drengilega. And since this is mostly about Iceland and Icelandic, this is still used today. Drengur in the modern language is referred to a young boy, but in a legal setting, if you are going to bear witness, you can swear on the Bible, but if you don't want to do that, you can swear on your drengskapur, on your trustworthiness. So do we have another slide, William? Maybe. Yeah. So, and here on the right, we have a modern interpretation of an oath ring. This was reddened with a sacrificial bull blood, and you would swear an oath on it. Now, if you broke that oath, you would be the lowest of all low. You would be a shameful, terrible individual. You would be a nýðingur. A nýðingur is not quite the opposite of Dringur, but close enough. Nýðingur also has this sort of element of supernatural, that you can curse someone with a need. And again, we're talking about combat and violence. The usual response if somebody called you a Nýðingur was to kill him. So these were the two opposite ideas, Dringur and Nýðingur. The third one is Orðstír, and the direct translation would be word glory, and that is what people say about you or think about you after you have gone, preferably after you have gone. So people would, so we have to understand that fighting was about much more than life or death. It was about Orðstír. And we could see, if we have another slide, William, we could see that Fradi attained Orðstír in his life. Still, 1,000 years later, we're still talking about this man. And another slide. And it is best depicted in Hávamál, stanza 76, where they say that your cattle may die, your kinsmen may die, you yourself may die, but a good Orðstír never dies. So again, this is about much more than life and death when fighting. It's about Orðstír. So there are many other aspects to this, to Orðstír, like magic, laws, societal norms, predestination, magic, luck, virðing, a man's worth, sæmd. But in general, this is about the Orðstír, the infinite life. Life is finite, Orðstír is infinite. So just one example how our 21st century mindset is different from the Viking age when it comes to combat. It was okay to burn someone alive inside their longhouse, but it was horrendous to murder someone, to kill someone without taking responsibility for your action. Am I missing something, William?
No, I think it's all good.
Yeah, okay. Then we'll jump to the next one, and that's the empty hand fighting, the next pillar. Usually called glíma or fang in the old sources, though it has other names as well. And glíma is all about power. It is a combat method that doesn't involve weapons, even though weapons may be used later on in the fight, as we can see here in this picture. And I'm packing massive amounts of information here in just 2 minutes. Usually I give 1 hour lecture just on this alone, and with questions afterwards and so on. And also one point to mention, the Glíma Association of Iceland, they are the torchbearers of Glíma. Glíma is the only Viking age sport that has survived the Viking age. Everything else died. But they haven't published anything in English. So be really wary of your sources when you see something on the internet regarding Glíma in English. So Glíma, Glíma is the national sport of Iceland, and William was talking about echoes of the past. And this is where we could walk backwards the steps to figure out how it changed, how it evolved, and what happened, and what was Viking Age Glíma. It has an unbroken line from the settlement era till the day-to-day, and it informs us how Vikings dealt with violent activity. And it was with brute power, head on, take down what was in front of you with just raw power. And it was often akin to lifting heavy stones. For example, there's a saga where it says that a man wanted to prove his strength, and the people watching asked him, "Oh, are you going to do glíma?" And he said, "No, I'm going to lift heavy stones." So it was akin to lifting heavy stones. And there is always an overlap. Unarmed combat of a society will always fit with the armed combat of the society. And this is what we will see with the Vikings as well. In the glíma, they did it with full power. And with the weapons, they did it with full power as well, where we see phrases like "höggva herðarnir," to cut someone down from this head down to his shoulders, is a common saying in the literary sources. And so what we are seeing now is the mindset says the mindset must fit with the empty hand combat, and the empty hand combat must fit with the armed combat. So a flicky strike. So if me and William were fighting and I gave him a flicky strike and I killed him, it's not worth talking about. There's no Orsteer there. But if I really cut him in two, people would say, wow, when Reynir cut William in two, it would be something worth talking about. Am I missing something, William?
No.
Right. And we continue to the last pillar. That is the king of weapons. This is the weapon that Vikings ran to when danger was near. And you might think it's the prestigious sword or the iconic two-handed axe of the Vikings, or even the weapon of the god of war, Odin, the spear. But all our research says it was the humble stone. Now, stones are thrown at least a bazillion times in the sources, and one of the superior battle location called Viking, where they would run to in a fight, that is because it had height advantage and loose stones. Loose stones were also brought on a ship before a naval battle, thrown to the other side, and you can also see it in the fortifications. They would throw into the fortification and out to the fortification. So this is I think 15th century manuscript illumination, and you can see that these are just young boys playing snowball fight, but they're training for war. We can see that it's identical to what was happening in the Viking Age. So what does this all tell us? It tells us the idea that stones were so important. Now, you might not have seen a stone in a museum setting, this fascinating weapon, and archaeologists probably won't get any grant for finding a stone, but it tells us so much. It tells us that this fighting systems of Vikings was not technical, was not technically driven. It didn't have flowery technique. It was just do what you have to do as long as you leave the battlefield a drinker with your Orsteer enhanced. Am I missing something, William?
No, I'll take over from here.
Okay.
It's just a quick summary. These are the three pillars we think you need to understand Viking combat and thus Viking society. If you took a Viking, dressed him in ninja clothes and gave him ninja weapons, you'd still know he was a Viking because how he fought. I'd like to look very, very briefly at the weapons. We don't have time to do much more than point them out. And if you have questions, please, we'll talk more about them at the end. These are the weapons of the Vikings: the sword, the sax, which is a short sword, the axe, which came in both one-handed and two-handed varieties, the spear, and the bow and arrow. And the primary defense was the large round wooden shield. And in addition, some men may have worn helmet and mail shirt. And those were the weapons of the Vikings. Now, how are these weapons used? And here, I'll turn it back to Reynir.
Thank you. So again, just a recap. Fighting was about more than life and death. It was about Orsteer, being a drinker. And you never show anything other than full power in your strikes. You will see this most clearly in the Klima practices. And this improvisational element of using whatever you need to, stones or anvils or what have you, a better tool for the moment than your tool, you changed. You want to leave the battlefield with your Orsteer intact or enhanced. So fighting was not technical. It was tactical. It was clever. And the word they used in the old language for people who are tactical and clever is Viking, battle-wise. And the highest of battle-wise people is of gods is Odin, of course. He's the planner and plotter of it all. He spies around the world from his high seat. He uses his ravens, Hugin and Munin, to send them out in the world to tell them news. He even raises the dead, a vulva, to get knowledge about the coming events. And so everything must interconnect. We use layered sources, we use layered testing and interconnect inside the system itself, but also in the realm of humans and the realm of God, we must see the same layered sources. And in Thor, Odin, and Tyr, we see the essence of Viking combat. We see the power, the cunning, and the idea of being a drinker. So we'll discuss tactics a little bit, and I'll start with spies or njósnamenn. Before any plan, before any tactic, you have to have information. You have to gather information. And that could be done. And the njósnamenn in the Viking, it could have been anybody. It could have been beggar woman. It could have been you yourself, or men you sent out, or even professional spies like Njósnarhelgi, where they use a backstory and disguise and so on and so forth. So this tells us a really important element about Vikings in general, about the society. Now, we've only talked about combat, violence. And as William mentioned about the first verse of Hávamál is, whenever you enter a door, look around, because you don't know where the danger is. But in Hávamál as well, there's a lot of stanzas about hospitality. And it was a sacred duty. If a man was in trouble outside your home, you need to let him in. And it makes sense because the Scandinavian climate was not so hospitable. So there are many instances where, in the literary sources, where a man is outside your home, you need to let him in, but you have no idea, is he a spy? So it's this paranoia of really wary, but still hospitable at the same time. These two conflicting ideas make this twisted, beautiful society. But what were spies used for? For example, for an ambush. Am I missing something, William?
No, that's it.
Okay.
Do you want me to take over from here?
Yeah. Why not?
All right. So an ambush was a way to achieve a combative goal without wasting manpower. And you just sit and wait with a superior force where the target's likely to pass. Concealment wasn't needed because an ambush wasn't dishonorable. And when the potential victims saw an ambush developing, in virtually all cases, they continued forward or even sometimes waited for the ambushers to arrive. Now, this is a picture of the site of a classic ambush that's mentioned in the literary sources. And the ambushers waited on top of this hill because they knew from their spying that the victims would be traveling along this river valley. And when the victims arrived, shown in the black arrow, the ambushers came down the hill, forded the river to meet up with them. Now, the victims wanted to get to this high spot here, which would have been a good V for them to fight from, but they saw they didn't have time. So they turned into the ravine here, and the ambushers followed them, and that's where the fight took place. Reynir?
Yeah, I would just like to add to this. This is, again, the conflicting ideas that show this twisted world. Now, in Iceland particularly, these are all families, and somehow they're all connected in one way or another. Foster brother, intermarriage, something of those lines. And the highest idea is to be a drinker, to be a man you can trust. Now, there's an ambush going on. You decide to participate or not, because you might be ambushing the brother of your foster brother, or because you're ambushing him for your sister. So it's, who are you a drinker for? This has made many really interesting episodes in the literary sources, because you need to be trusted. But who do you need to be trusted by? Or who do you want to earn that trust? It's a really fascinating thing. But I think we'll just jump to the next one. Or
Yes.
right? Yeah, jump to it. So in an ambush, they usually came with more people than the people they were ambushing. So why on earth didn't they just attack them at their home? And the home is the stronghold. It is the defender's playing field. It has a limited entrance, as you can see there. Choke points making it hard to enter and attack. So even if you brought 1,000 men in, you would still have to go through this choke point. So you would fight 1,000 people one at a time. And inside the house, there's low crossbeam, overhead, can catch weapons, all kinds of things. The fire, hiding places. And maybe the most important thing is there's low light. So you might hurt or kill somebody you did not intend to hurt or kill, be that a woman or a child. And if you do that, you are the opposite of what is important in this life, to be a drinker. You can't be trusted. So instead of all this, instead of attacking them directly, when they attack them at home, they just set the house on fire. And it is made really clear, this is to limit casualties, to do something inhumane in a humane way. And how it was done in Scandinavia sort of makes sense. Just everything's trees, we sort of can figure out what happened. But in Iceland, it is a bit different. We have the turf houses. And turf does not easily ignite. It's vegetable matter and soil, and it's not good kindling. So what they had to do was, what they had to do was ignite the door and the frame, the only wood from the outside, because that would set the main wooden frame on the inside of the house on fire, and set the house on fire from the inside out. So men would surround the door, put kindling, put it on fire, and everything would happen between this doorway there. This is where they would let people out who they did not intend to kill. This is where negotiations happened, and this is where people were killed who tried to run out that they were tending to kill. Am I missing something, William?
No. So since an armed attack was possible at any time, houses were built with escape routes. And two of them are mentioned. One is a hidden door. And the nature of these doors is really unclear. When you look at the archaeology of Viking Age houses, usually the location of the door is very, very clear. So for instance, in Eiríksstaðir in Iceland, the front door when the house was abandoned is this area here, and it's really quite clear from the archaeology. And we can see that the front door used to be here at an earlier stage of the house. But then we have this thing in the back, which just does not match up. There's clearly something going on here. Could it be a secret door? We have no evidence because we simply do not know what these secret doors were. Maybe there was just a place where the turf had been cut so that it could be pushed out from the inside in case of an attack or in case of someone trying to set the house on fire. We simply don't know. But another type of escape is the secret tunnel. And these are found in some Viking houses and mostly in Iceland. And these are only recently being found, usually by accident. This tunnel in Keldur was only found in the 20th century when a new septic system was being installed in the farm. And they typically run from the master's bedchamber in the house out to the sea or a river. And it was used as an escape route if the house was attacked. And these tunnels are robust stone-lined structures that took a lot of effort to build. And these kind of features suggest that violence was a constant threat. And the video ends there, so we don't know if Reynir was able to escape or not. Now, in the same way that a house provided protection away from the house, fighting men sought a desirable battle location, a place that gave them an advantage. It could be a fortification, a virki, such as the Trelleborg fortresses that are found in Denmark. They take the form of a high wall topped with a palisade fence. The other desirable place is a V that we've talked about earlier, a desirable battle location, sometimes planned and constructed, but often just spur of the moment. And the things that made a place a V were, first of all, elevation above surrounding terrain. So you had an advantage for projectiles and for visibility, and the availability of loose stones for throwing, but also limited access. So your enemy can't approach you and come up the back or the sides. And a number of V are mentioned in the literary sources, Gervor, which had a lot of loose stones for throwing, or Klevar, which also had elevation and a lot of loose stones, and even Dranke, where Grettir fought to his death. And even a haystack wall on a farm could be a V because of the elevation. So now at this point, I'd like to move on to large-scale battles. And typically these were dynastic battles where the outcome of the battle decided who was going to rule the land. So these were between kings or earls or landed men, and they took place both on land and on sea. And we're going to skip over mass battles on land simply because of time, and instead we'll just focus on sea battles. And they shared many similarities with land battles because they were fought on what were in essence floating islands, the decks of the ships, as we'll talk about in a minute. But first, a short detour to review Viking ships. There are two broad categories: warships and merchant ships. Different ships for different purposes, also different crews in each type of ship. Now, there were two technological marvels in the Viking Age, and one of them was the warship and the other was the sword. And both had only a single purpose: delivering violence or the threat of violence. Now, the size and the nature of the warships varied quite a bit, and the warships were different names, different categories, but today we don't really have an idea what distinguished one of these categories from another. This is a sketch of a large royal warship. It was a little over 100 feet long, and it had space for 60 rowers. Speculation is that the crew was usually double the number of rowing positions, so that half the crew was rowing and half the crew was off. Now, in a sea battle, the ships were basically tied together to create a raft or a floating island in two groups, the two opposing sides. And some ships were left free to go where they were needed during the battle. And the way the battle worked was the ships advanced and met bow to bow, and they were drawn together with grappling hooks. And the goal of the battle was try to clear the deck of the opposing ship, basically destroy all the enemy and throw them over the side. Now, the nature of the battle, first, you needed to clear a space so you could board the opposing ship. And so projectiles were used for that. Stones, bow and arrow, spears, and also specialized weapons for naval battle, etgir, kesjas, narispjot. And then you board the enemy ship. Reynir, would you like to take it from here? You're a much better storyteller than I.
All right, get ready for a story, kids. So here we see the sort of placement of the team on a ship, and we'll not go into that, but at the front there, where William is pointing, is where the most aggressive people were. And this is again the essence of Viking combat. We can see it here. At the purple side over there is the other end. Yep, is where the king was. This is where your Orstir lies. And you have to, at one point or another, board the ship and go through, the word they used is ryðja, which today is used for example, when you plow snow. So you had to plow your way through the other end to gain your Orstir. So the only way to do that is standing in front of, can you switch images? Is the only way to go through this is by considering something more important than life or death, your Orstir at the other end. And you need to do it with full power. You need to plow through it. And you need to be really clever, tactical, and cunning while you go through this, because there are many blades that have your name on it. Next, am I continuing?
Yeah.
So we'll go really quickly through the last two tactics because they're so important. They are what make a Viking a Vikingur. And they are separate. If we go back to the first one, they are separate, but they belong in the same runestone. They are dueling and raiding. And these is what made a Viking a Viking. Next one. So a Vikingur are men who herja and ræna, but who do not stela. And herja means to harry or attack, and ræna means to take someone's property with his knowledge, and stela is to take someone's property without his knowledge. And this is black and white difference. If you take someone's property with his knowledge, you take responsibility for your actions. So you're a Vikingur. If you stela, you're just a horrendous man, a Nýðingur. But Vikingur also, the title is a black or white title. You can be a glorious human being and be a Vikingur, or you could be the lowest of the low and be a Vikingur. The only difference was if you harried at home or somewhere else. If you harried at home, you were a wretched man, a Vikingur. But if you harried abroad, you brought home the riches of another world. You were a glorious man. You were a Vikingur. And strangely, even today in Icelandic, it has been used in both ways, black or white. So yeah, can we have another one? So this all started with Egil's chapter 40, where Egil had just killed a boy in a disagreement over a game, and he ran home to his mom and he wrote a poem about what his mom said. And his mom said that he should set off with Vikings when he grew up and stand on the prow and kill a man and another. And I thought, what the hell is wrong with this mother? Where's child services? Is this normal? But now we understand that this is just a different society. Both raiding and dueling were about Orstir and gaining wealth. And this was by putting oneself to the test of combat to gain wealth in Orstir. It was expected of young men. William.
Okay, and I'd like to talk about the other tactic, and that is raiding. And raids took place anywhere that a ship could sail and land that had movable wealth. So Vikings traveled on pretty much every sea that you see in the map. And they raided pretty much every land that bordered those seas. They even sailed their ships far upriver to attack attractive targets. And what they were looking for were places with movable wealth, towns, trading center, churches, monasteries. And in between the raids, they went to a place called the Vikingabali, and two are specifically mentioned in the literary sources. And these were places where there was safety in between the raids because there was no political power. Maybe the king or the earl had been paid off with treasure. And at these sites, there seems to have been ship repair, trading centers, and entertainment. Now, the nature of the raid was to gather a team of raiders, and many kinds of people raided. Kings raided, landed men, farmers, sea kings who held no land, pretty much everyone. Now, at this time, Viking society was agricultural. So raiding was generally not a full-time activity. People did it for a summer or a few summers and then returned to their farm. And the team members were chosen presumably based on their value to the team. So a man who had Orstir was desired for the team of raiders. And even an unproven young man who had not yet achieved Orstir, but if his family had Orstir, he was desired and chosen for the team. And what they did was they would take a ship and sail to wherever there was wealth and fight or threaten to fight over the wealth to take it from the owners. And our research suggests that there were three types of raids, and these sometimes overlapped. The first time of raid we call power raiding. It was political. It was, in a sense, terrorism. It was a way for a political leader, such as a king, to assert authority over another land. And it was highly destructive and meant to be destructive. The goal was to destabilize the current ruler of the land. And the raiders landed and they took whatever wealth could be carried to the shore. And valuable objects were taken aboard the ship as booty. And livestock was slaughtered on the shore for food and taken aboard the ship. And people who could be sold as slaves would be bound and taken aboard. But what is not specifically mentioned is people who are not suitable for slavery for whatever reason were probably slaughtered on the shore. And then they would just destroy everything else, destroy with fire and with sword to destabilize the current ruler of the land. The other next type of raiding is what we call poker raiding because of its similarity to high stakes poker. The Vikings landed their ship and talked to the landowner, and they gave the landowner two choices, either hand over his wealth or else fight to defend it. It was less destructive than power raiding, and the only goal was to gain wealth and Orstir. So it was like poker in that you were making the bet that your might was greater than that of your opponent, and the stakes in the bet were property and life. And then the last form of raiding was piracy. You lie in wait for a good prize to sail by and challenge them to a fight, and sometimes immediately or sometimes at a place and time agreed upon. If the other ship gives in without a fight, the crew was set on land with only the clothing on their backs. If there was a fight, it was very similar to that of a naval battle. Now, all things come to an end, and that includes raiding. At the last half of the 11th century, raiding came to an end, and there were a number of reasons for that. There were changes in Viking society. There were fewer landowning men with the means to go off raiding. There's also changes in the European political situation. Lands were now ruled by central kings who had standing armies and fortifications who could defend prizes like trading towns. There was also the conversion to Christianity, and raiding was not in keeping with the tenets of the church. So the northern people continued to trade, but raids slowly came to an end. Reynir, did I miss something?
No, you're doing really well, William. I think so. Personal opinion. So,
thank you.
The last tactic, and I will go with I'll go through it really quickly because just we have gone way over time, I think. And that's dueling. That's Holmganga and Innvíging. And this is the upper part of the stone we saw before. And they are often so similar, these two actions, dueling and raiding, that in the law coast, you can't really decipher which is which. So dueling was done like this. I want William's stuff, so I go to him and said, give me your stuff, or we can fight a duel. And if he doesn't, he can give me his stuff, or he can decide to show up to a duel. But if he doesn't show up to a duel and says he will show up, he will be a Nýðingur, and I will make an effigy or a scorn pole or something. So this is the essence, again, of Viking combat. William has to show up to the fight. He needs to be a drengur, a man he can trust. Now, on the battle site itself, the weapons used are swords and shields in nearly every single case. And very often they had shield holders in front of the men with the swords, the men dueling. This was a really twisted action. It was stationary. You could not move. And we see that in all the sources, that there's no movement, not even an inch. If you back an inch, you are not this drinker to be trusted. You're a sort of coward. And it was round-based. Now, since William, I challenged William, he would have his first strike. And we would both have 3 shields. Once William has done his strike, I only have 1 strike before he has to do again. So, A, I have to be a drinker, show the courage to show up. B, I have to be a drinker. I can't even move an inch. And C, when I strike, I need to strike with full power, because if I don't kill William or hit William, I would at least want to break one of his shields, limit his defense. And then I would like to be really cunning and tactical. I would like to get to William. So these are the 3 elements we talked about before, the 3 pillars. And oftentimes, most often, the dueling was about this property. These bastards just trying to steal your property, or Reina, not stela. But it could also be a proxy war. So 2 families didn't have to fight. These 2 would settle it out. Or even if a legal matter didn't go my way, I could ask for a duel to settle it. Am I missing something, William?
No, I think we're reaching the end here.
Yeah.
That's the holistic picture of Viking combat we see from our research. 3 main aspects: power, improvisation, and the need to be a drengur and achieve orstir. It was a weird, twisted society, not romantic heroes, but at the same time, not evil, bloodthirsty monsters. A society of humans, but people with very different values than ours today, and with a different code of conduct than we have today, and very different from what has been perceived before. And with an understanding, without an understanding of Viking combat, we don't believe it's possible to understand Viking society, their place in history, their accomplishments. And we've tried to give you a glimpse of that today. We hope we've explained it in the book. And now we'd like to open it for discussion.
Well, thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating. Very, very interesting. What a tremendous amount of research you guys have done. But I have a question about who was a Viking. We so often in the sagas, and our preconception is that Vikings were men. But now we're hearing and reading more about the archaeology that's being done, where it appears that women were Vikings as well, and potentially went on raids. Can you give us some insight on that, or have you done any research on that?
Yeah, you're going to throw me under the bus.
I'm going to give it to Reynir. Yes.
I will take it. I will take it, because it's a minefield. And I'll speak very frankly. It's a minefield. When we wrote the book, I did not want to go into this subject. I'm raised by my mother. I have sisters. I know their might. I don't want to get into this discussion, really. So, but the zeitgeist that we talked about before, today, it is really important to find in the past what we want today. So a lot of funding is put towards research into finding these women. Let's put it that way. Now, in the sources we have, we did not find these women, and I can promise you, Diana, I was looking. I wanted to find them. I wanted a role model for everybody. So I found a few in the literary sources, but more than that, I found that women didn't do fighting, and that's not typical in any society. Mm-hmm. And I also didn't want to go into it because I think women of today have been doing such a really big thing by asking for equality, fighting for their position in life. And I didn't want to find, well, it has always been like this, so you didn't do anything. So I must say, I wish this question didn't exist, because I don't want to answer it. William?
Not a lot to add. We really went deep into this, and trying to find layered sources and trying to create a picture, and the picture did not form. So right now, my thinking is it is not proven. And there's just too many sources that point away from women being a part of violence and fighting in the Viking Age. Now, that's not to say that they never fought. And there's certainly many examples that make sense where they would, but it was not their typical role in that society. But if they were forced to, they would.
Okay, thank you. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time.
Okay.
But I thank you again. You guys have been just marvelous with your presentation. Before we go, I do want to tell everyone about our next event, which will be on May 2nd at 8 p.m., where we will have an author's corner with Eric Newman, who has previously written a book on Iceland with kids, so traveling with kids through Iceland, and a children's book, Lundi the Lost Puffin. His latest book is 100 Tips for Visiting Iceland, and gives us tips and techniques for, easing the pain around the time it takes to plan something, money, and the whole stress involved in doing that. And again, on our website, under the Travel and Culture tab, you will find a list of our authors and the books that they have published, and it's a great place to go shopping. So Reynir, William, thank you so much. And for everyone who's attended today, thank you so much. We appreciate your support. Bye-bye.